Hi, and welcome to the last video in the Client Brief 5 series, which looks at the role of the texture and material artist. Now, whoever has been assigned this task, if you didn't select it yourself, you may be thinking initially, well, there's not really anything for me to do until the 3D modeler or the environment artist gets back to me. And to some extent, there is some work that you need those models to be able to do, but there's still a lot that you can do. There's a lot of prep work that you can put into your file to start generating materials and so that they're ready for when you do get those objects. Now, I'm going to use this scene that you've got in front of you, which we've been developing throughout the series of videos, just to show you how to apply some different materials and textures. But I'm also just going to be covering generic material editing in 3ds using the Slate editor. But obviously, if you're using Blender or Substance Designer, they both also have the same kind of approach, and there's some general terms and things that are applicable across all kinds of applications. So the first thing that I want to do is open up the material editor. So that's either M in 3ds or just come up here and it should open. Now you may have this version when you open up, and that's fine for kind of basic application of textures, and we can kind of click on the diffuse and change the color of things, but we want to do something a bit more advanced. So we're going to go into the Slate material editor, and although this may seem very intimidating to start with, it's not as bad as as it first seems once you get the hang of it. So we have kind of a lot of different things on the left here, none of which down here at least we really want to worry about too much. Here we have our navigator, which will come into use in a little bit once we start getting a few materials in here, and we have our material parameter editor, but obviously because we don't have any materials, there's nothing in there. So we're going to go ahead and make our first material. So we're going to right click here and we get these options. So we can either make materials, make maps, or make controllers. So firstly, we want a material. We want a general material, and we're going to make a physical material. So in 3ds, we have kind of like a standard material for their basic rendering, and then general physical materials start looking at physically based rendering and that kind of thing. We're not going to necessarily render in that format today, but it's good to have the option to. So if we click on that, we get this, right? So this is one of the material slots. It's a physical material, and if we double click on the object, we can see a view for that. And if we right click on here, we can actually do open preview window. So that would be a bit bigger if we want a bigger view for that, and you can even grab that and kind of dock that somewhere else, but we'll close it up for now. And if you double click on the tab for the physical material, you'll notice that we now have a load of options. Don't be intimidated by the amount of things here. We could still just change the color the same way as we did in the basic one, and if that was all that we did, that would be absolutely fine. And once we come away from this, we can actually drag the output of this material, and we could assign it, let's say, to this grass, right? So now that's grey, and if we were to change this to a green again, we can see that that's now changing. Okay, but we have a few more options on here if we want to. And on the left here we have lots of different inputs for this this texture and material, and one of them is the base color. Right, so although we can change that on the diffuse, what we could do is we can add a map to control that a little better. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click up here, and instead of adding a material we're going to go to maps, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into general, and we're going to go up to bitmap. So here we're actually going to apply a grassy texture to this plane, and I have some available. You might want to have a look online for a few. Unsplash.com has a few. There's some really great online texture resources for you to use, but just make sure that you reference and attribute where you got them and who made them in your report. But for now we're going to use grass, and that's going to be in there. If I double click on there again, I can see that it looks like my grass, and I can quite simply now just drag the output of this, and I can move that around if I just hold left click, and I can connect it to any of these inputs. I can connect it to multiple inputs, but for this one I'm just going to do base color. And here we can now see that if we open the preview window again, we can see that that's now taken on kind of some of the properties of our texture, and we can kind of carry on playing with this. We might want to change the reflectivity amount, we might want to change the metalness, those kinds of things. We've got kind of this glow, and I'm going to try and get rid of that by knocking a couple of these off. So one of the other types of maps that we use is a color map, and we use these to assign an RGB value to a percentage. So for example, if we were to change this, and so double click on there and make this all white, that would be kind of 0 on a range of 0 to 100. And if we were to put it to black, it would be 100 out of 100. And anywhere in between on this would be anywhere between 0 and 100, so midway might be 50. So let's just put it to black for now. And if I were to now use this to maybe connect to the reflectivity, we can see that that white glow has gone. So there's no reflection on this texture anymore. And I'm actually going to open that, and I'm just going to dock that down there for now so we can see a bigger version. So we can see that that's completely gone, and if I take that off again, we can see that it comes back. And also, if I were to change this from black all the way to white, we would see that the reflections come up. So you can see how this map, as we change this black and white value, it changes the kind of magnitude of the reflection. And we could also, if we put this on maybe metalness, and we'll put this on reflection as well. So metalness is kind of the properties and the reflectivity properties that many metal objects have. And again, we can kind of set that to black and white. And if you want, you can always have an on and off. So if you shift drag one of these, it will copy it. And if I have a white, so you can always kind of see what it would look like if you put it all the way to white and black. So sometimes it's kind of handy to have an on and off map. So that's pretty much it for the grass, and we can see here that you know, that kind of, it's been applied, but it looks really big. Yeah, so if we were to just close that for a second and have a look through here, these grains of grass are way too big for you know, given the scale of everything. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pop back in here, and we're going to go back to our texture file, and you'll notice that there's kind of a few things here. This will change the offset and move this around. I'm just going to right click and reset that, and that will also kind of move it the other way if it's not quite in line, a bit like with our reference images in the humanoid series. And we can rotate again like we had to in that series. But what I'm looking for here is tiling. So tiling refers to the ratio at which the whole texture file, so from border to border, is applied to our shape. And by default, it's applied 1:1. So one size of the texture to what appears to be one size of the shape. But that's way too big for us. We need to scale that down. So if we go ahead and make this, let's say 0.5 and 0.5, we can already see that in our map ball and in the viewer, that's already smaller, but nowhere near as small as we need. So let's go ahead and try 0.1. Okay, fine, it's gotten even bigger. So here we can see that that is definitely way too detailed. So let's try going the other way. So this means that for each border of our shape, our plane here, we actually go through this material twice. Okay, so it's like having two tiles down on the floor instead of one. And we can see that in some areas this may start to reproduce the texture, so that's kind of another reason why it's default to 1. But the scale appears to have reduced, but we need to do a bit more, so let's try and change that to something like 5. Okay, so that's looking a bit better there. So now what we have is we have kind of slightly better scaled. We might want to increase that even more, but that's okay for now. And we have things like the water. So if we were to open this again, we could move over here. We could produce another material, and this is where this navigator starts to come in handy. So we can see kind of where different materials are, and the red box, you know, kind of says where we are. Then we're going to come in here and we're going to add another bitmap, and we're going to put water on there. So water, and we're going to put that on there. I'm just going to switch that over to our water. Now, we are going to need some reflection on our water, but we maybe don't want full reflection. So if we just put a color map onto that again, and we'll kind of leave that on grayish, that kind of looks okay, really. And what we can do is we can either right click, so we can either select our water plane, right click and click assign to material, or we can just do it the lazy way and just drag that out like that. And that's kind of made an improvement almost immediately, I think. Let's try and just move this so that it's maybe a little bit above the ground. So there we go. Yeah, that looks okay to me. Click off that. Yeah, okay. So this is all a really basic introduction to how to do textures. So don't worry if it doesn't look really realistic. But do just carry on trying. with different things. One of the things you might want to try on the terrain, for example, if I select this, is a special material that's called top bottom. It's on the left here, or we can access it in here. So top bottom. And what this controller does is it actually it separates two different textures and it assigns them based on a kind of a height map or an angle of the geometry. So in our terrain we have ups and downs, so we have some vertical faces and we have some horizontal faces. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go here and we're going to put a standard bitmap on, and I'm going to put the grass one on again for now, just as the base for the top one, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add another one because I've got some rocks in here, and I will put that on for the bottom one. So we can see from this ball here that we are starting to get you know, a mix. So at the top of our terrain we have this grass, and at the bottom we have these rocks. And what we're going to do is we're just going to grab that and assign that. Now at the moment it's only grey, and the reason for that is that it kind of likes it kind of defaults to showing the bottom quite a lot. We need to change the variation at which it will show the top texture. So what we need to do is we just need to play around with that a little bit and see kind of until we start getting the grass visible. And if we just do a quick render of that, we can see here that we're actually starting to get quite a nice mix of these. We've still got that reflectivity on these because these are physical materials, so go ahead and do what we did down here by shutting those off with some maps. And we're also getting the same issues with the tiling of the textures, so go ahead and adjust those as well, and you might want to adjust it on the water. But that is very much how those kind of work. I'll just change that. So this is what we had before, and if I click and again, we can see that we've got a bit more rock there, but that's looking pretty genuine. So play around with that, and there are plenty of details on specific UV wrapping and texturing on Moodle that we did in the lab. So when you finally get the cart, you can start applying the materials you've already made. Maybe you've got a metal for the tracks, maybe you've got some kind of wood or something like that to go on the cart, and you can sort of create them and then apply them to those different areas. So good luck and have fun.